My own son packed his bags, took his wife, and her mother then flew off to the coast. And me? He left me alone on the farm, knee-deep in mud, toiling in the garden like a servant. My name is Margaret Holloway. I'm 64 years old, and that was the moment I realized my son no longer saw me as his mother but as a burden. I felt abandoned, betrayed, and invisible in the very home I built with my hands. These weathered, calloused hands that had worked this soil for 40 years, that had raised that ungrateful boy from nothing, that had scraped together every penny to give him opportunities one never had. And this is how he repays me. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in the United Kingdom, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in Australia, I want to know. Don't just sit back, tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The morning after they left, I sat at my kitchen table, the same oak table my late husband built with his own hands 35 years ago. 4 chairs surrounded it. Always 4 chairs. One for him, one for me, one for our son David, and one for whoever might join us. But now 3 of those chairs sat empty, mocking me with their silence. The coffee grew cold in my cup as I stared at those vacant seats. David's chair, where he used to sit every Sunday morning, telling me about his week, his plans, his dreams. His wife Sarah's chair, where she'd pick at her food and check her phone, barely acknowledging my existence. And that 4th chair, the one where her mother Linda would perch like a vulture, criticizing everything from my cooking to my housekeeping with that saccharine smile plastered across her face. Gone. All of them. Gone. I walked outside to survey what they'd left me with. The garden David had promised to help me maintain stretched before me, overrun with weeds that seemed to have sprouted overnight. The tomato plants I'd started from seed drooped under the weight of unpicked fruit, rotting on the vine. The fence posts leaned at dangerous angles, threatening to collapse entirely. Everything was falling apart, just like my family. Mrs. Henderson from next door peered over the property line, her eyes filled with that particular mixture of pity and curiosity that made my stomach churn. "Margaret, dear," she called out, her voice dripping with false concern. "I heard about David and Sarah. Such a shame, leaving you all alone like this." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that my son had looked me in the eye 3 days ago and said, "Mom, we need some space. Linda needs to be near the ocean for her health, and Sarah thinks the city would be better for her career." Not once did he ask what I needed. Not once did he consider that maybe, just maybe, his 64-year-old mother might need her family close by. Instead, I forced a smile and nodded. "They'll be back," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. But Mrs. Henderson wasn't fooled. None of the neighbors were. By evening, I could see them gathering in their yards, whispering behind cupped hands. They left her all alone. After everything she's done for that boy. Ungrateful, that's what he is. Their words carried on the wind, each one a dagger to my already bleeding heart. The nights were the worst. The silence pressed down on me like a physical weight, heavier than the humid summer air that clung to everything. I'd lie in bed, listening to the house settle around me, every creak and groan amplified in the emptiness. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from my parents, chimed every hour, marking time that stretched endlessly before me. How do you tell people your own son chose his wife's mother over you? How do you admit that 40 years of sacrifice, of putting his needs before your own, of being there for every scraped knee and broken heart and failed exam, counted for nothing when it came down to choosing sides? If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, subscribe right now. And if you won't, at least comment and tell me why you'd ignore the voice of someone who feels forgotten. The shame burned in my chest like acid. I'd raised David to be better than this. I'd taught him about loyalty, about family, about responsibility. His father and I had worked ourselves to the bone to give him every advantage, to ensure he'd never want for anything. We'd sent him to college, helped him with his first apartment, welcomed Sarah into our family even when it was clear she looked down on us. But Sarah came with baggage, namely, her mother Linda. A woman who'd never worked a day in her life, who'd lived off her late husband's insurance money and expected the world to cater to her every whim. From the moment David brought Sarah home, Linda made it clear that she considered our humble farm beneath her daughter's station. She'd wrinkle her nose at the smell of fresh-turned earth, complain about the rustic conditions, and constantly suggest that David and Sarah deserved better. Better than me. Better than the home I'd created. Better than the life I'd built. And apparently, David agreed. The phone rang the next morning, jolting me from a restless sleep. I stumbled to the kitchen, my joints protesting every movement. The caller ID showed David's number, and for a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe he'd come to his senses. Maybe he realized what he'd done. "Mom?" His voice was strained, panicked. "Mom, what happened to the cards? We can't withdraw a single cent nor pay anything." I smiled for the first time in days. Sweet, naive David. He'd never paid attention to the financial details, content to let me handle the mundane business of managing our accounts, our property, our lives. He had no idea that every card, every account, every asset was in my name. His father had insisted on it years ago, back when we were building this life together. "The farm stays in the family," he'd said. "No matter what happens, it stays with us." "What do you mean, son?" I asked, injecting just enough confusion into my voice to sound genuine. "The credit cards, the bank accounts, they were all frozen or something. Sarah tried to pay for dinner last night and her card was declined." Linda's screaming about the hotel bill. "Mom, we're stuck here with no money." The irony was delicious. They'd abandoned me thinking they were free, thinking they could live their lives without the burden of caring for an aging mother. They'd underestimated the woman who'd kept this family together for 40 years, who'd managed every bill, every investment, every financial decision while they lived their carefree lives. "I don't understand," I said, letting a note of concern creep into my voice. "Everything should be fine." "Well, it's not fine." David's voice cracked with desperation. "Mom, we need you to fix this. Can you call the bank?" I hung up without answering. The phone rang again immediately. Then again. Then again. Each ring was music to my ears, a symphony of their growing panic. I let it go to voicemail, settling into my favorite chair on the front porch with a cup of tea and listened to the sounds of my farm birds chirping, cattle lowing in the distance, wind rustling through the corn. Peaceful sounds. Sounds of home. By the third day, the voicemails had grown increasingly frantic. Sarah's voice, sharp and demanding. "Margaret, this is ridiculous. Call us back immediately." Linda's shrill complaints about having to borrow money from strangers. And David, my poor, confused David, pleading with me to explain what was happening. Mrs. Henderson stopped by that afternoon, her eyes bright with gossip. "Margaret, I heard the most interesting thing at the grocery store. Apparently, your David and his family are stranded at some fancy resort with no way to pay their bills. Is that true?" I sipped my tea and watched a hawk circle overhead. I wouldn't know anything about that. But I did know. I knew exactly what was happening, and it filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. They'd thought they could discard me like an old piece of furniture, useful once, but now an inconvenience. They'd learned the hard way that I was the foundation holding their comfortable life together. My lawyer friend, Patricia Chambers, stopped by that evening. We'd known each other since high school, and she'd handled all the legal affairs for the farm over the years. She settled into the chair across from me, her sharp eyes assessing. "I heard about David," she said without preamble. "Word travels fast in a small town. Margaret, they're calling. They're desperate." Patricia leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Don't rush. Let them sweat. Let them understand the weight of their choices. You hold all the cards here literally and figuratively. They made their bed when they chose to abandon you. Now let them lie in it. Would you have stayed silent like I did or rushed to save them? Comment below and don't just watch, make your voice heard." Patricia was right. For too long, I'd been the one making sacrifices, the one bending over backward to keep everyone happy. When David wanted to marry Sarah despite my reservations, I'd supported him. When Linda needed a place to stay after her husband died, I'd opened my home. When they wanted to modernize the farm with expensive equipment they couldn't afford, I'd co-sign the loans. And what had it gotten me? Abandonment. Betrayal. A son who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to his happiness. The calls continued for a week. Voicemails filled with tears, threats, and eventually, genuine desperation. Sarah's mother had apparently collapsed from the stress, requiring medical attention they couldn't afford. David was working odd jobs at the resort, trying to scrape together enough money for food. Sarah had swallowed her pride and was cleaning rooms to earn a few dollars. Good. Let them learn what real work feels like. Let them understand what it means to struggle, to fight for every penny, to have your back against the wall with nowhere to turn. I'd lived that life for years while building our farm, our future, our security. Now it was their turn. Finally, after 10 days of silence from my end, David called one last time. His voice was broken, defeated. Mom, please, can we meet? We need to talk. We're coming home. Home. As if they had any right to call this place home after what they'd done to me. But I agreed to see them. Not because I was ready to forgive, but because I wanted to look them in the eyes when I delivered my verdict. They needed to understand that their actions had consequences, that betrayal came with a price they might not be able to afford. They arrived 3 days later, their fancy luggage replaced with cheap duffel bags, their designer clothes wrinkled and stained. David looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Sarah's perfectly styled hair hung limp around her shoulders, and her her precious mother looked like she'd been through a war. They sat in my living room like supplicants before a queen, their eyes downcast, their usual arrogance replaced with desperate humility. David's hands shook as he reached for the glass of water I'd offered. Sarah picked at her nails, a nervous habit I'd never seen before. Linda sat silent in the corner, her mouth set in a thin line of bitter resentment. We made a mistake, David began, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, we were wrong. We should never have left you. Family doesn't abandon each other. The irony of hearing those words from his mouth was almost too much to bear. Family doesn't abandon each other. Where had that wisdom been 2 weeks ago when he was packing his bags? It was all a misunderstanding, Sarah added quickly, her voice tight with forced sweetness. We never meant to hurt you. We're family, and family sticks together. I let them continue their pathetic performance for several minutes, watching as they squirmed under my silent gaze. Finally, when I could stomach no more of their lies, I stood up. Family doesn't abandon one another, I said, my voice cutting through their excuses like a blade. Family doesn't leave their mother to work the farm alone while they chase dreams of a better life. Family doesn't choose convenience over loyalty. David's face crumpled. Mom, please. We know we were wrong. We're sorry. We want to make this right. Make it right? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You wanted freedom? Now live with the cost of it. You thought you could use me as a safety net while treating me like a burden. The money you chased means nothing without respect. I walked to the door and opened it, the late afternoon sunlight streaming in around me. This is my home. These are my accounts. This is my farm. And you are no longer welcome here. Sarah's mask finally slipped. You can't do this. We're your family. Family, I repeated, savoring the word. You keep using that word, but I don't think you understand what it means. Family doesn't abandon their own. Family doesn't leave someone to struggle alone. Family doesn't choose sides based on convenience. Linda finally spoke, her voice venomous with rage. You bitter old woman. You're destroying your own son's life out of spite. I turned to face her, this woman who had poisoned my son against me from the very beginning. I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply refusing to enable your selfishness any longer. David made his choice when he walked out that door. Now he gets to live with the consequences. David was crying now, huge tears rolling down his cheeks. Mom, please. I'll do anything. I'll make it up to you. Just please, don't cut us off completely. You want to make it up to me? I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. You should have thought about that before you chose her mother over yours. You should have considered the consequences before you decided I was disposable. I walked outside, leaving them sitting in my living room, and climbed into my truck. As I drove away, I could see them through the window, David with his head in his hands, Sarah pacing frantically, Linda sitting rigid with fury. Good. Let them feel a fraction of the abandonment I'd experienced. Let them understand what it means to be truly alone. The weeks that followed were glorious. Word spread quickly through our small community about David's spectacular fall from grace. The golden boy who'd once been the pride of our town was now a cautionary tale about family loyalty and respect. People who'd envied his success now shook their heads in disgust at his treatment of his mother. Mrs. Henderson updated me regularly on the gossip. "They're staying at the Blue Moon Motel," she reported with obvious satisfaction. Can you imagine? The Blue Moon. After all their airs and graces. The Blue Moon was the kind of place desperate people stayed when they had nowhere else to go. Weekly rates, torn carpets, and the permanent smell of cigarettes and disappointment. It was perfect. Sarah had found work at the diner downtown, her manicured hands now chapped from dishwater and her designer clothes replaced with a polyester uniform. Linda was reportedly confined to their motel room, too proud to be seen in public but too broke to leave town. And David, my poor, foolish David, was doing construction work for anyone who would hire him, his soft office hands now bleeding and blistered. The community's judgment was swift and merciless. These people had watched me work myself to the bone for 40 years, had seen me sacrifice everything for my family. They'd witnessed David's ingratitude and Sarah's disdain for our simple life. When the truth came out, when they learned that he'd abandoned his mother for his wife's family, their reaction was predictable. The hardware store owner refused to sell them supplies. The grocery store clerk made them wait in line while serving others first. Even the pastor at the local church, a man who preached forgiveness and compassion, couldn't hide his disapproval when they attended Sunday service. They were social pariahs now, outsiders in the community that had once embraced them. And it was exactly what they deserved. Patricia called me with updates from the legal front. "They tried to challenge your control of the accounts," she reported, amusement clear in her voice. "Their lawyer took one look at the paperwork and advised them to settle. Everything is ironclad, Margaret. Every asset, every account, every inch of that farm is legally yours." Of course it was. My husband and I had been careful, methodical in our planning. We'd learned from watching other farming families torn apart by inheritance disputes and property battles. Everything was documented, witnessed, and legally binding. David's name appeared nowhere on any ownership documents. The courthouse appearance was a formality, but I insisted on being there. I wanted to see their faces when the judge confirmed what they already knew, that they had no legal claim to anything I'd spent my life building. David looked hollow as the proceedings began, his expensive suit replaced with an ill-fitting thrift store version. Sarah sat beside him, her jaw set in stubborn denial, while Linda lurked in the back row like a vulture waiting for carrion. Judge Morrison, a man I'd known since he was a boy coming to our farm to buy fresh corn, reviewed the documents with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Holloway," he said finally, "all assets remain under your sole control. The farm, the accounts, the property, everything is legally yours without question." David's shoulders sagged as the words hit him. This was the moment he finally understood that his actions had consequences, that his betrayal couldn't be undone with apologies and tears. I stood up, straightening my shoulders and lifting my chin. "Your Honor, I want it on record that these people are no longer welcome on my property. They are not family, they are not heirs, and they have no claim to anything I've built." The gavel came down with finality. Justice at last. As we filed out of the courtroom, David tried one last desperate appeal. "Mom, please. We can work this out. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your son." I stopped and turned to face him, this man who'd once been the light of my life, who'd filled my days with pride and purpose. "You left me with dirt on my hands," I said, my voice carrying across the courthouse steps. "Now all you're left with is empty ones." The drive home was peaceful. I rolled down the windows and let the warm summer air wash over me, carrying the sense of growing corn and fresh hay. These were the smells of my life, my work, my legacy. No one could take them from me now. The farm looked different as I pulled into the driveway. The same buildings, the same fields, the same oak tree where David used to build forts as a child. But everything felt lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The oppressive cloud of resentment and obligation that had hung over this place was gone, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I walked through the garden that evening, pulling weeds and checking on the vegetables that had survived my weeks of neglect. The tomatoes were coming back, their green fruit promising a good harvest. The corn stood tall and proud, rustling in the breeze. Even the fence posts seemed straighter, as if they too were relieved to be free of unwanted burdens. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, casting long shadows across the fields my husband and I had worked together for so many years. This was what we'd built: not just a farm, but a legacy. A testament to hard work, sacrifice, and perseverance. David had chosen to walk away from all of it, and that was his loss. The phone rang as darkness fell, but I didn't answer it. I knew it was them, probably making one final attempt at reconciliation. But I was done with their apologies, done with their promises, done with their convenient definitions of family loyalty. They'd made their choice, and now they would live with it. 3 months later, Mrs. Henderson brought news that they'd finally left town. Packed up and drove away yesterday, she reported with evident satisfaction. Word is they're heading to Sarah's sister in Michigan. Good riddance, I say. Good riddance, indeed. They'd come into my life with their demands and expectations, their subtle criticisms and obvious disdain. They'd tried to reshape my world to fit their vision of respectability, to erase the rough edges that came from a life of real work and honest struggle. When they couldn't change me, they'd decided to abandon me. But I was still here. Still standing on the land I'd helped tame, still living in the house I'd helped build, still carrying on the legacy my husband and I had created together. They'd thought they could break me, but they'd only freed me from the burden of trying to please people who could never be satisfied. The farm prospered that fall. Without the constant drain of supporting David's expensive tastes and Linda's unrealistic expectations, I found myself with resources I'd forgotten I had. I hired local workers to help with the harvest, invested in some long-overdue improvements, and even treated myself to a new truck, something I'd been putting off for years while funding their lifestyle. The community welcomed me back with open arms. People who'd been walking on eggshells around David and his pretentious family now felt free to express their true feelings. They'd never liked the way he'd grown distant from his roots, the way he'd seemed embarrassed by the honest work that had made his comfortable life possible. "You did the right thing, Margaret," Tom Fletcher from the neighboring farm told me as we shared coffee at the diner. Family means something. It means loyalty, respect, being there when times get tough. If they couldn't understand that, then they weren't really family at all. He was right. Family isn't just about blood relations, it's about choice, about commitment, about standing together when the world tries to tear you apart. David had chosen his wife's family over his own, chosen comfort over character, chosen the easy path over the right one. Winter came early that year, blanketing the farm in pristine white snow. I spent the long evenings reading by the fire, something I hadn't had time for in years. The house felt different now, not empty, but peaceful. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore, it was restful. Sometimes I'd catch myself looking at David's empty chair and feeling a pang of loss. Not for the ungrateful man he'd become, but for the little boy he'd once been. The child who'd followed me around the garden, eager to help plant seeds and pull weeds. The teenager who'd worked beside me every summer, saving money for college. The young man who'd brought his dates home to meet his parents, proud of the life we'd built together. That boy was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Someone who valued appearances over authenticity, convenience over loyalty, status over substance. I mourned the loss of that child, but I couldn't forgive the man he'd chosen to become. Spring arrived with a burst of green life, and I threw myself into planning the new growing season. The local agricultural extension office asked me to speak at their annual meeting about sustainable farming practices. Apparently, my farm had become something of a success story in the region. Standing at that podium, looking out at a room full of respectful faces, I felt a pride I hadn't experienced in years. They called me a stranger in the end. My own son, the child I'd carried in my body and raised with my heart, told people I'd become a stranger to him. He was right, but not for the reasons he thought. I was a stranger to the woman I'd been before, the woman who'd bent over backward to please everyone, who'd sacrificed her own needs for the comfort of others, who'd accepted disrespect in the name of keeping peace. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who understood her own worth. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments. And if you walk away without subscribing, at least be honest. What's worth more than standing up for yourself when your own family betrays you? I am Margaret Holloway. I am 64 years old. I own 300 acres of prime farmland, have a bank account that reflects 40 years of careful management, and possess something more valuable than money: self-respect. I am a stranger to the life I used to live, the woman I used to be, the family I used to enable. And I've never been happier to be exactly who I am. They taught me that blood isn't thicker than water when that blood runs cold with ingratitude and disrespect. They showed me that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go, even when it breaks your heart. They proved that standing alone with dignity is better than standing together in shame. The sun sets over my farm now, painting the sky in colors that would make a poet weep. This is my kingdom, built with these weathered hands and sustained by an unbreakable spirit. No one can take it from me because I finally understand what it's worth. Everything. It's worth everything. And they're worth exactly what they chose to give me in return for a lifetime of devotion. Nothing at all.